Hi everyone and welcome back. We are joined today by Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at Tehran University and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So I'm very happy to have you on because it appears that we might be heading towards another big clash in your part of the world. That is the inability to curb or destroy Yemen. Well, seems to uh, be incentivizing some escalation on the American and Israeli side. We also see now Trump going out and sending this tweet with a final warning to Hamas, in which they have to release these hostages. Otherwise, it's unclear how Trump would respond. Again, I'm not sure if this is to frame the war as being about freeing hostages or if this is an actual warning. I was wondering what you read into these recent developments. Are you seeing another big war in the Middle East, possibly even between Iran and Israel and the United States?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Glenn. It's always an honor being on your show. Well, the thing about Trump, and you know Trump better than I, uh, is that none of us really, at least none of the people around me and the people who I follow, such as yourself, have been able to provide us an appropriate understanding of how his mind works. And so, uh, since he is constantly shifting and changing his position and contradicting himself, it's unclear if this tweet is anything special. It is significant, obviously, because he's the leader of the United States, but also because it comes at a time when the Israelis are intensifying the genocide in Gaza, and they are bringing down buildings, the remaining buildings that were full of refugees at an extraordinary pace. And it's something that Western media is not covering. Yesterday and today, we've seen large numbers of buildings full of families just destroyed, so that the starvation and the misery would be intensified. So the regime is building up pressure and at this time, Trump is making this has made this posts. He's put up this post. So I think he is providing them cover, but he is doing this at a time when the genocide is being intensified. But I don't know if this is going to be a final warning. My understanding from people who know a thing or two about what's going on in Gaza is that the resistance in Gaza, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the smaller groups, they are in a strong position, and they have new abilities to build tunnels faster, and they have the capabilities to continue this resistance for a very long time. And we've seen just today how uh, an operation was carried out against the regime. Uh, on the one hand, both in Gaza, we had a security incident, which I don't know exactly what happened. But also we had, in Tel Aviv, I think, I just checked I didn't check the details, but a number of Israelis were killed in an operation carried out against them. So the situation is not going well for Netanyahu. This is not a victory. And I don't see how Trump is going to be able to change this in favor of Netanyahu. What is clear is that Trump is very close to Netanyahu. He has no problem with what's going on, even as the world has turned utterly against the regime and people's eyes have been opened to the reality of Palestine, the history of Palestine. Because when people see these things day after day, they start asking questions and they learn about the Nakba, and they learn about how these people took their homes and raped and murdered uh, and sent Palestinians off to the West Bank and, of course, the Gaza Strip. So as the world has changed and as the narrative, the dominant narrative among people across the world has changed, we see that the elites in the United States, in Europe, but in Trump in particular, have become even more uh, defiant in supporting Netanyahu and what he's doing. From my understanding, I don't think there's going to be any major change on the ground in Gaza, meaning that a an attempt to destroy the resistance or Hamas. I don't see, at least for now, the United States taking any direct action in favor of Netanyahu that they have not already done. They will continue to support this genocide. They'll continue to fund the Israeli regime and Netanyahu, provide him with financial support, military support, and political support. But I can't see anything new happening at this moment. But we saw how, for example, with Russia, just right, they Trump said he was going to end the war before he enters office, and gradually we saw him shift towards mainstream the mainstream view in the West, so the elite's view in the West. And then we saw the meeting in Alaska. There was hope that there would be some sort of change. And now he's talking about intensifying the sanctions, and the people around him are saying the Europeans must join us to bring down the Russian economy. So every day, every few days, every few weeks, we see these sudden shifts and changes on different issues. One day he's saying he's insulting China. The next day he calls the President Xi his friend. One day they're insulting India. The next day, it's just chaos, and so it's literally for me impossible to make any analyze this in a way to make it meaningful for the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, well, on the impossible task of figuring out what Trump is doing, and because yeah, sometimes the rhetoric changes within half an hour. But on this topic, though, there's also this argument going around, which I've also heard from some high-ranking politicians in the European Union, that Trump's attack on Iran was an effort to prevent Israeli escalation, because at the time they saw the war against Iran, it was being lost, and they feared that the Israelis would escalate in a dramatic way to rescue the situation, that is, possibly even involving nuclear weapons. So Trump did this strike. Some say that this was, in coordination, or, well, they were in dialogue with the Iranians, and by claiming that, well, all the nuclear facilities are demolished, they're gone, they're obliterated, then it essentially put an end to the war. So I was wondering, what do you read into this from, again, you sitting in Iran? Do you see this as credible, or, again, it's always the same argument? Is Trump appeasing the hawks, or has he joined the hawks? So it's always very, again, the strategic ambiguity, it seems very deliberate on his side. Indeed, his administration almost brags about the fact that nobody knows what they're doing. So I was wondering if you had any perspectives on this.
I think it's becoming increasingly clear that they don't know what they're doing. It's not as if this is some sort of um, major attempts to create ambiguity. I think that Trump really has no idea about what he's doing, and I think his performance over the past few months has shown that. With regards to the trade war, the tariffs, the treatment of India, of Brazil, the war in our region, genocide. I think it's become clear. I mean, for a couple of months, we could have used, or we could have accepted that to be a valid argument for those who made it, or at least an not necessarily valid, but something that could be taken seriously. But I think after a period of time, it's become increasingly clear that there is no real strategy. With regards to your question, I think I should divide it into two parts. One is the very question whether the Iranian nuclear program has been severely damaged or destroyed, or obliterated, as he likes to say. we know that the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency was removed, and their assessment of U.S. strikes was that they were not that substantial and in effectiveness. And I think it's quite clear that the Iranians, before the war began, they had already, uh, first of all, there's nothing of great significance on the land, on the surface to be struck. So whatever the Israelis bombed during those days was unimportant. All the key aspects or elements of the Iranian nuclear program they're all very deep underground. Without being privy to information on the nuclear program, I would guess that they remain untouched. I'm just guessing. So it's just a it's just a guess. And based on the assessments made by uh, American military intelligence, I think my guess is justified. I would imagine that the Iranians built those underground facilities uh, with the belief that at some point the United States will bomb it, even with them, and they may bomb it with, let's say, nuclear weapons. That's, I think, how they uh, moved forward when they constructed these underground facilities. But I don't believe that there's been any severe damage. B, I think the head of IAEA said this just a couple of days ago that Iran's ability to produce centrifuges has not been diminished. Iran uh, has a very strong industrial base in general, and the reason for that is partially because of the sanctions. For 40 some years, we've been sanctioned, and over the last couple of years, we've had maximum pressure sanctions. So Iran has been forced to become more self-sufficient in different industries. And of course, the nuclear program is founded upon an industrial base. And Iran's military program, because when the revolution happened, Iran didn't have a military industry that was notable. Almost everything was imported. But now Iran's military industry is very advanced. We know that the Russians import from Western sources. We know that what Russians import military hardware and equipment from Iran. So that, of course, that too needs an industrial base. So Iran has the industrial base, and the head of the IAEA has admitted that. Now, Iran does not need IR-1s, the first generation of centrifuges. Iran's centrifuges today are much more advanced, much smaller, and Iran knows how to enrich uranium to very high levels. So Iran has both the bombed assets. If we accept the military intelligence, the American military intelligence, they are safe. Iran can produce new centrifuges, advanced centrifuges. And now that Iran is not cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Agency, there are many things that the Iranians can do that they will have absolutely no knowledge of. So this ambiguity or strategic ambiguity works to Iran's favor. In my opinion, the U.S. bombing of those sites was a major mistake because it allowed Iran to discontinue cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency for legitimate reasons. In other words, the international community, the global south, Russians, the Chinese, they understand Iran's position, especially since the IAEA was implicated in all this. With regards to the Israelis escalating, there's only one way in which they can escalate. They used everything that they had in their war against Iran, in the 12-day war of aggression, because they were trying to overthrow Iran. So they gave it their best shot. They used everything that they had, and they also used the facilities across the region that were put at their disposal in the Persian Gulf, in Turkey, the airspace of Jordan, Western capabilities. All of these were mobilized. The only way in which the Israeli regime could escalate is, of course, to use nuclear weapons. That, of course, is not something that I can say will happen or won't happen. But if Israel does use nuclear weapons, obviously, then Iran will change its nuclear posture immediately. Iran is a huge country. It has huge capabilities. Its underground capabilities, defensive and offensive capabilities, are second to none in this region. And that would have catastrophic consequences for the Israeli regime as well. In addition to that, the world will turn against the regime. This is not about this is not just about genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. A nuclear attack would have global consequences, and it will have uh, enormous an enormous impact on the well-being of people across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. And so I think that would bring about the end of the Israeli regime. Uh, because the world will not tolerate it. It's not something that Trump and European leaders could justify. They probably would. The Europeans and Americans will justify basically, I mean, the elites will justify anything that the Israelis do. If they slaughter all the Palestinians and then all the Lebanese and all the Jordanians and all the Egyptians, they will continue to support it. And the BBC, CNN, Fox News, Breitbart, everyone will somehow justify it and blame the victims. That's how awful. That's really how sinister these people are. Uh, you know, they see Palestinians like cockroaches. To me, that's just how it is. They they would justify anything, but the rest of the world won't tolerate this. And we saw in BRICS that how the symbolism of BRICS shows how fast the world has changed. So I can't really comment on that. But what I can say is that the Israelis, when it comes to conventional warfare, they escalated as far as possible. But when Iran, but actually, after the Americans struck Iran, the Iranian strikes against the Israeli regime became more effective and more damaging. And during the last 3 days, almost all of Iran's missiles got through. So the American strike did not help. My understanding is that the Americans gave concessions to you. And the one reason for that is public knowledge. When the so-called ceasefire, we have to remember that Iran didn't accept the ceasefire. It's just a halt uh, in fighting. In other words, Iran could restart this based upon the threats made by the Israeli regime. We don't have a ceasefire with them. But um, during Trump said when the ceasefire took place that the Iranians can now sell all their oil to China. Why would he say that? That has nothing to do with the war. It has nothing to do with this, the halt in hostilities. So I think that slipped from his mouth, but that was, I think, one of the concessions that the United States gave to Iran, that they will ease back on certain things, on sanctions. Of course, Iran is already exporting all of its oil, and it has maximum capacity. But I think it was meant to say that we will harass Iran less in different ways. But after the United States struck, as I said, things got worse. And Steve Bannon said that I saw him say this twice myself, where he said that things got really bad for Israel. And basically, the real story, the hidden story, the unknown story about this war is that Trump saved Netanyahu. And but those last three, those heavy strikes by Iran were carried out after the U.S. strike. And of course, afterwards, Iran also struck the American base in Qatar. And Trump said none of the missiles struck. But then later on, images came out showing that indeed the Iranian missiles did strike, and they struck the most sensitive parts of the base.
Well, I wanted to follow up on something you said. There was you mentioned the more likely strategic ambiguity of Iran regarding um, its nuclear program. Well, you're then referring to the nuclear energy, but after the war after the United States and Israel attacked Iran, I had a talk with Theodore Postol. As you know, he's nuclear scientist. He knows all about these nuclear weapons at MIT. He also advised the Pentagon for a while. And he was making the point, as he argued, what a disaster the decision to attack Iran was. And he made the prediction that Iran would likely develop more strategic ambiguity overall about its nuclear program. In other words, it would possibly take a position similar as Israel after a while, not confirming or denying or simply not commenting on any developments on nuclear weapons. Now, just to make it clear, I know you're not speaking on behalf of the government and you're no longer working as an advisor for the nuclear negotiation team. But how likely do you see it that Iran might develop more ambiguity in terms of the nuclear weapon program as well? In other words, to elevate its deterrent. I mean, well, the argument of Ted Postel would be this would be rational. Again, not hoping for it, but recognizing that it's much more likely that Iran would see the need for deterrent. So either it would get nuclear weapons or it will not, but anyways, leave more ambiguity about this to make countries think twice about attacking it again in the future, especially its nuclear reactors.
Well, I should stress that when I was an advisor to the nuclear negotiating team, both under Dr. Zarif in 2015, but also more recently with Dr. Bogheri, I was a media advisor, so I wasn't a part of the negotiations itself. Anything that I say is speculation, obviously, but I think that what I think his assessment is an accurate one. I think he definitely knows what he's talking about, and I actually I didn't see your particular program with him, but I saw a program that Alistair Crook advised me to watch. I think it was a few weeks before a week or two before your program. I should watch your program with him. But I think he makes a lot of sense, and I think that's basically the path that Iran is probably taking. Iran is not cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Agency as we speak. I mean, there is cooperation in the sense that they allowed two inspectors to come to Iran to go to the Bushehr nuclear power plant, because it has been built by the Russians, and they were putting in new fuel and removing old fuel. And since the Russians feel the need that they have to cooperate with the organization, and they are part of the project, and they're also building two new units for the Bushehr nuclear power plant, the Iranians allowed those inspectors to go to Bushehr, but they have not been allowed to see anything that has to do with Iran's own programs that have to do with enrichment and so on. So it's only been Bushehr. But so I think that this ambiguity is there. There is the fatwa, and that fatwa we've discussed earlier as I understand it, two key issues linked to it. One is it's a moral issue, and the Iranians during the war with Saddam Hussein, when the West gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, the leader back then, Ayatollah Khomeini, Imam Khomeini, he refused to allow Iran to produce chemical weapons in response to Saddam's chemical weapons, and he said they're inhumane. And so there is a precedent for this. But the second issue is, of course, that Iran has 15 neighbors. Iran is a very large country, and having 15 neighbors is an excellent thing, but it also has potential problems. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, then you have all these countries that are immediate neighbors, but also countries that are further off that would be encouraged to develop nuclear weapons. And that is dangerous for the region. So Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon for these reasons. But the current head of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani, was a very competent figure. Before he became the head of the council, the Supreme National Security Council, last year or a few months ago, he came on television and said that if there's a threat, a threat to Iran's existence, then Iran's nuclear posture will change. And he is now the head of the Supreme National Security Council. So people can read into that what they will, but I think it's clear that the professor's assessment makes sense. I think that Iran wants to preserve nuclear ambiguity. That doesn't mean it will produce a nuclear weapon. I don't, I, but it means that Iran could create an environment where nuclear weapons could easily and swiftly be produced and put into those underground bases across the country in case of an emergency. I think that makes sense. I think any country that sees how the Israelis and the West behaves would understand that Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon, but Iran will not allow its existence to be threatened. And the behavior of the Israeli regime in carrying out this Holocaust and the behavior of the West in supporting the Israeli regime, no matter what it does, I think makes this assessment not just a valid assessment, but I think the more correct position to take.
Yes, well, this ambiguity, though, it seemed that that was a predictable consequence to come. But I guess just a very brief last question. How likely do you see it as another war starting between the Israelis and Americans on one side and the Iranians on the other?
Well, Glenn, that's what people talk about here in Iran, but at the same time, people go about their lives. They go out for dinner. I'm on campus. We have theses that have to be presented and work to do. So life goes on. I think the Iranians feel confident today about their situation because they did win the war, especially the last days of the war went well for Iran. But also it's clear that the Iranian armed forces, you hear news that the Iranian armed forces are swiftly moving to prepare themselves for war. And that since the Israeli regime used all of its capabilities, they now know, the Iranians know about their own weaknesses and the Israeli regime's weaknesses and strengths too, much better. So both the military is making changes and they're improving their missile capabilities and their defense capabilities, their security capabilities. Lots of people who were affiliated with Israeli intelligence, they were arrested and their networks were dismantled. And in addition, so and also the security apparatus is more aware of what sort of capabilities the Israeli regime has, and they're dealing with that. And also, Iran's relationship with countries across the global south are improving. You saw that during the official photo that was taken before the parade, the military parade in Beijing. Uh, President Pezeshkian and his daughter was with him. Were standing right beside President Xi, and I think that shows how deep the relationship is. And also, during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, President Putin and President Pezeshkian had a very long meeting as well. And he had meetings with others. But what I'm saying is that Iran's relationship with the global south is evolving. And the US and Western countries, and you've discussed this in detail, by pushing India away and Brazil away and antagonizing all these countries and threatening Russia, all these serve Iran's interests because it gives Iran more options and more opportunities to strengthen its relationship with countries across the global south. So I think that if there is another round of war, it will be worse for the Israeli regime than last time. And that's why I would say that if I was an Israeli, I wouldn't do this. But we have to keep in mind that this is Netanyahu, and his interests do not necessarily coincide with the interests of the regime. And the people around him, although overwhelmingly Israelis are Zionists and they support, according to their own polls, they support genocide, but the people around him, his political allies today, are uh, compared to other Zionist fanatics. So rationality is not necessarily something that governs or that rules in Tel Aviv or in Washington. So we cannot be certain about the future, but Iran is much more prepared today than it was before.
Well, Professor Marandi, I know you're a busy man, so I will leave you go now, let you go now. But thank you so much for your time.
It's always a pleasure, Glenn. Whenever you tell me to come on your show, I will come on your show.
Well,
I always have time for you.
thank you.
Thank you.